In The Elder Scrolls Online, players can equip however many pieces of item sets to gain their desired bonuses. In the game, as of the publication of this video, there are 77 craftable item sets, 13 arena sets, 48 base game dungeon sets, 84 DLC dungeon sets, 58 monster sets, 26 mythics, 30 weapon sets, 16 1-3 piece bonus sets or otherwise known as jewelry sets, 68 trial sets, 70 PvP sets, and 99 overlaid sets. With Update 41's item set additions of 8 dungeon sets, 3 PvP sets, and a mythic, and the upcoming Update 42 item set additions with the Gold Road chapter, presumably 8 trial sets, 3 craftable sets, 3 overland sets, maybe 3 mythics, and the confirmed 14 more class item sets coming to the Infinite Archive, the foreseeable total number of item sets in 2024 will be at a minimum of 632 or somewhere around there. 632 or so item sets is quite a lot, and can be overwhelming to both newcomers and returning players. Of course, the pool of what sets you should use narrows tremendously if you want to look at not what is viable, but what is optimal, aka the meta. Though even without such filters, there are objectively just really bad item sets, and there are objectively just really good item sets. But this is not a video about how bad or good which item sets are, more so about what could perhaps replace them if that can even happen. What do I mean? Let me explain. With so many item sets in ESO, particularly with craftable sets, many people who played host to their guilds with their houses containing rows and rows of attunable crafting sets complained of the limited slots of furnishings being taken up by them. With the introduction of Grandmaster crafting stations that consumed and consolidated over 300 of these crafting stations, this problem of inventory or space was solved, especially when one considers a sticker book or item sets collection system that allows players to reconstruct a piece of an item set that they had bound to their account without needing to keep that piece in their bank, storage coffer, or character inventory. However, the core issue of item sets remains unaddressed, being that item sets have over the years more and more become woven into the entire game as part of its in-game rewards or incentives for players to expect, especially from new content that's released. This paradigm of the item sets being rewards creates a deep hole in which both the player and the developer side are unfortunately stuck in. For players, the answer seems simple. Stop making new item sets. Start reworking the older item sets so they're more worth using. Go back and change or update the item sets to the power level of newer sets. The problem with this answer is that ZOS has sort of tried twice in 2 large item set audits post update 26 in the year 2020, which saw to seemingly significant updates or adjustments to basically most of these old item sets players are mentioning. However, as evident 3 or so years later, the audits didn't really pan out well. Perhaps ZOS could do it again, but better, although this in itself may be complicated due to the new standardization numbers ZOS wants to balance stats or tooltips by, combined with how much of the reworks they could fit into each quarterly update should they even wish to do so. But Item Set Audit 3.0 would surely present an entirely new problem in which new item sets may not come out as many players want, which means there wouldn't be new item sets in new content. So, what would incentivize players to do new content? New types of rewards, surely, but what would replace item sets, a commodity that players grind for to gain an additional power boost for the new patch, or a way for them to be completionists and, in some cases, leverage for economic gain? For developers, the potential answers also seem simple, but more daunting. Should they not deliver new item sets as old item sets are worked on? What are the logistics of that? One may ask, why not make new item sets while working on old item sets? Ideally, that would be the case, although in the press meet for the Gold Road Chapter Global Reveal, the developers revealed that from their internal discussions, it's actually becoming harder and harder for even them to come up with new concepts or ideas for item sets, which I think provides another discussion tangent that I won't touch on in this video. However, when I look at Update 41's item sets and the bamboozling, useless mythic, I can concur with the developers' sentiments. None of the sets really amaze or impress me. Some of them feel like reskinned versions of previous item sets, and a couple of them, while interesting on paper or in practical application, don't really change how I would modify the approach to my gameplay in either PvE or PvP too much. The more interesting item sets or mythics in the past I feel like did so to a greater degree, such as going for the last hit on an enemy, wanting to be crowd controlled, or equipping a not so great AoE skill to trade for a powerful proc, and so on and so on. The developers further acknowledge that removing item sets may be hard, as they become woven into the game as part of in-game rewards or incentives for players to expect for new content, a topic that I myself have brought up multiple times at this point, and one we're exploring a bit more in this video at depth. The developers are clearly very passionate about their work with the game, and of course anyone who makes games want people to play their creations. On the business side, however, it's important for a MMORPG like ESO to not only get bursts of new player activity in a seasonal cycle, but even more important for it to retain a good portion of pre-existing and new players. Retaining players isn't just good for metrics, which is always nice for corporate, but important in gaining revenue from the retained player base. There is a reason why you often have to go through the Crown Store tab for various free things or quests. Keeping you in the game longer means you might end up buying something at a higher chance later. Additionally, it seems based on the new monetization methods for ESO Plus subscribers with things on the Crown Store that can only be bought by people who subscribe, the game has been struggling even more than usual with retaining players, specifically players who were longtime ESO Plus subscribers, and are now dropping that subscription, assumingly. So ESO not only needs to retain players, but needs to convince somehow players to pick up ESO Plus subscriptions again. So it's an incentive for players to do their content repeatedly is item sets that are often locked behind DLC content, which can be free if you have ESO Plus, and that goes away. What's left? And again, this thought reveals yet again the glaring lack of a reward system we've been talking about for years now when it comes to ESO. I would like to ask all of you watching, what would be appropriate or your desired replacements for rewards in place of item sets? If the continuous addition of item sets is unsustainable in both the player and developer perspectives, and with the clear statements from studio director Matt Firer expressing their desire to work on existing content are to be taken seriously, what truly would replace item sets in DLC dungeons or patches or trials and so on in the future? I feel like the update to the Undaunted Key rewards, which only increased the amount of keys for the DLC pledge giver in Update 41, alongside the earnable overland mount for Necrom chapter back in Update 38, were small probes to gauge players' interest in what they exactly want. I think respectful comments on this video would also be a good way to present some of that interest or where it is, so definitely do leave a comment down below. For my part, I think it's a very hard problem to solve. If we're to discuss what kind of rewards a lot of players would want, well, that's kind of easy. We just need to look at the Crown Store and other MMOs. The plethora of earnable mounts, skins, and other shinies available in other games that just doesn't exist in ESO would surely be a welcome sight to see, but simply adding a one-time reward to a piece of content, whether it's PvE or PvP or whatever level of gameplay, isn't enough. Because what happens if you get the Fungal Grotto mount? You don't go back. The same issue of one-time rewards when it comes to trifectas, titles, or mounts or achievements, especially after the update that implemented account-wide achievements, shows itself. So while, yes, there should be more or could be more one-time rewards for varying levels of players, I don't think that would necessarily solve anything here long-term, at least as far as content replayability goes, though that may also be a subjective stance since different groups of people play for different things. Now obviously one way to do one-time rewards well is providing a repeatable method of getting to those rewards, like clear dungeon A X times to get Y amount of currency to buy Z. This sort of exists in the form of the infinite archive goods you can buy with the unique currency there, or in the form of player-based achievements for a no-death run. The only problem with this is that this can run a fine line between being too grindy or being too quick, especially when we look at the drop rates for certain furnishing items or recipes, or what have you. Then of course I look towards perennial rewards, meaning rewards that players can keep going back for. We already have some examples of that, like Undaunted Keys or Talvar Stones, but the sources and quantity or lack thereof, those kinds of things, tend to be not so great. Some people have brought up materials like Dragon Blood potentially being added to coffers or something for trials, citing their confusion over why we can get Dragon Blood or Dragon Room for Overland Elsewhere Dragon bosses, but not from the Sunspire bosses. While that's a great thought, we then approach that problem of cheapening the value of those materials when we're talking about the quantity of what kind of reward should drop and where, which again ties in with both in-game economy and player progression. So ultimately, I think my personal answer to this entire problem, as far as rewards go, is to suggest for developers that while they revisit the older content, and there's a lot of it, they could consider new one-time rewards with balanced progression checks to them, if applicable, and to review outdated systems like the leaderboards for both PvE and PvP, as far as what rewards go to who, and consider adding, as long as it makes sense, certain currencies or materials to certain content that incentivizes people to actually go back. As for new item sets, I don't think new item sets cannot just stop coming out, as much as everyone hates the incessant additions until the aforementioned issue of rewards or alternative rewards to item sets is finally resolved, and when the older item sets are ready to be audited again, but hopefully this time or next time better. Anyway, again, I could ramble on for longer and get into more specific things, but I think everyone at this point gets the idea and the problem, and I'm actually looking very forward to what people have ideas about or may suggest down in the comments below. So thanks for watching, and see you guys next time.